A billionaire businessman, accustomed to power and obedience, decides to personally visit the home of the cleaning lady who missed work. But when he walks through the door of a humble home, he is surprised by an exhausted mother with a feverish baby in her arms and other children demanding attention. An unexpected detail, a framed photo of him on the shelf and a boy saying, "He looks just like Daddy," turns this man's world upside down. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The Manhattan skyline glittered against the early morning darkness, a jagged silhouette of power and ambition. On the 78th floor of Reynolds Tower, Blake Sterling paced his corner office, the polished Italian leather of his shoes clicking against marble floors. At 43, he had built Sterling Enterprises from nothing into a tech empire valued at $18 billion. His face had graced the covers of Fortune, Forbes, and Time. His name inspired both admiration and fear throughout Silicon Alley. And now, at 4 in the morning, he was absolutely livid. "What do you mean she didn't show up?" Blake demanded, his voice cutting through the phone line. "This is the third time this month. The board meeting is in 5 hours, and the executive floor looks like it hasn't been touched." Melissa, the night manager, stammered on the other end. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. We tried calling Jenny, but there's no answer. I've called in someone from the day shift to come early." "No." Blake pinched the bridge of his nose. "This ends now. Send me her address." "Sir, HR usually handles her address, Melissa. Now." Minutes later, Blake's phone pinged with an address in Queens. He grabbed his coat, bypassed his waiting driver, and took his personal Aston Martin from the underground garage. The wheels screeched against asphalt as he turned onto the empty streets. The digital dashboard clock read 4:37 a.m. This wasn't about clean floors. This was about principle, about respect, about the systems and standards that had built his empire. If he allowed this level of unreliability in the cleaning staff, what message did that send to his executives? To his board? To the market? The GPS directed him through the sleeping city, from the gleaming high-rises of Manhattan into the more modest neighborhoods of Queens. The further he drove, the more his surroundings changed, from luxury boutiques to local bodegas, from doorman buildings to walk-up apartments. Blake pulled up to a weathered 6-story building on a quiet street. He double-checked the address, his irritation building with each passing second. Did his employees think he wouldn't notice? That he wouldn't care enough to act? His father had taught him long ago, you don't build an empire by being soft. He took the stairs to the 4th floor, his tailored suit feeling increasingly out of place. The hallway was narrow but clean, with faded carpet and walls that had seen better days. The overhead lights flickered slightly as he located apartment 4C and rapped sharply on the door. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. Blake heard movement inside, a child's voice, a hurried shuffling. Then the door opened a crack held by a security chain. A woman's tired face appeared in the gap. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him. "Mr. Sterling." The confusion in her voice only fueled his irritation. "Jennifer Mills, you were scheduled to work tonight." The woman closed her eyes briefly, a flash of panic crossing her features. I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I couldn't." From inside the apartment, a child started wailing. The woman glanced over her shoulder, visibly torn. "Open the door." "Ms. Mills, I didn't drive to Queens at 5 in the morning to have a conversation through a crack." She hesitated, then closed the door. He heard the chain slide and the door reopened. Blake Sterling had prepared a speech about responsibility and consequences, about standards and expectations. He'd rehearsed the words, "You're terminated," during the drive over. But as he stepped into Jennifer Mills' small apartment, the words dissolved on his tongue. The modest living room was cluttered but organized, evidence of a system fighting against limited space. A makeshift clothesline stretched across one corner, hung with freshly washed children's clothes. Textbooks and notebooks were spread across a small dining table, and in Jennifer's arms was a flushed, crying infant, no more than a few months old. "I'm sorry about the mess," she said, bouncing the baby gently. "Noah's been running a fever all night. I was going to call in, but my phone—" She gestured toward a cracked smartphone on the counter. "It died and the charger stopped working." Blake stood awkwardly in the center of the room, his commanding presence suddenly out of context. "You have children?" "3, Jennifer answered, still soothing the crying baby. Emma's 6. She's still sleeping. And Ethan. Mom, who's at the door? A sleepy voice called out. A boy of about 8 appeared from a small hallway, rubbing his eyes. He wore Spider-Man pajamas and had the same warm brown eyes as his mother. The boy blinked at the tall stranger in their living room, then froze, his gaze transfixed on Blake. Ethan, this is Mr. Sterling. My boss, Jennifer explained, her voice tight. Go back to bed, honey. It's still early. But Ethan didn't move. Instead, he walked to a small bookshelf in the corner and picked up a framed newspaper clipping. He looked at the photo, then back at Blake, his young face suddenly illuminated with wonder. Are you my dad? He asked, his voice small but clear in the quiet apartment. The question hung in the air like suspended glass, fragile, transparent, threatening to shatter. Jennifer's face drained of color. Ethan, that's not... I'm so sorry, Mr. Sterling. He doesn't... It's okay, Blake said automatically, though nothing felt okay in that moment. He stared at the framed article in the boy's hands, a Wall Street Journal profile from 3 years ago, his own face looking back at him from the glossy page. Why do you have that? He asked Jennifer, his voice unnaturally quiet. Her cheeks flushed. It's complicated. You were featured in my business management textbook. I was studying before... She trailed off, adjusting the now quieting baby in her arms. Ethan, put that away and go finish your homework before school. But it's not even 6 yet, the boy protested. Then get your math done early, she countered. Please. Blake found himself reaching for the framed article. May I? Jennifer nodded reluctantly. He examined it closely, a piece profiling America's top self-made entrepreneurs. The headline read, The Sterling Standard, How Blake Sterling Built a Tech Empire from His College Dorm Room. He remembered the interview, remembered the photographer asking him to look serious. Authoritative. You were studying business management? He asked, genuinely surprised. Jennifer nodded. At Queen's College. Night classes. I was halfway through my degree when... She glanced at the baby in her arms. Something shifted in Blake's perception, a subtle realignment. The woman before him wasn't just a cleaner who had missed her shift. She was someone with ambitions of her own, interrupted by life's complexities. Noah had stopped crying and was now regarding Blake with curious eyes, his tiny hand gripping his mother's shirt. Can I, Blake found himself saying, can I hold him? The request surprised them both. Jennifer hesitated, then carefully transferred the warm bundle into his awkward arms. Blake couldn't remember the last time he'd held an infant. Had he ever? The baby felt simultaneously fragile and substantial in his hands. Noah studied Blake's face with surprising intensity for a being so new to the world. Then, unexpectedly, the baby reached out and grabbed Blake's finger with surprising strength. He likes you, Ethan said, now standing beside them. He doesn't like most people. He cries when Uncle Roy tries to hold him. Blake felt something unfamiliar unfurl in his chest, a warmth he couldn't name. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around his own sent a strange current through him. Here in this cramped apartment in Queens, miles from his penthouse and his boardroom, something genuine was happening. Something that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet or expressed in a quarterly report. Jennifer watched them, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Mr. Sterling, about my job. We'll discuss it later, Blake said, surprising himself again. The words he'd driven all this way to deliver, you're fired, now seemed impossibly distant, like artifacts from another life. Your baby needs attention. And your son needs to finish his homework. Ethan grinned. Do you know math, Mr. Sterling? I'm stuck on fractions. Blake looked down at the boy, at his hopeful expression, then at Jennifer, whose exhaustion was etched in the shadows beneath her eyes. He made a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives, though he didn't recognize its significance yet. I know a little about fractions, he said, carefully returning Noah to his mother's arms. Show me what you're working on. As he sat at the small table beside Ethan, Blake Sterling, CEO of an $18 billion company, with a board meeting in 4 hours and a global empire awaiting his commands, found himself explaining the concept of equivalent fractions to an 8-year-old boy who thought he might be his father. And strangely, inexplicably, it felt like the most important meeting of his day. Blake's sleek Aston Martin seemed out of place, parked on the street outside Jennifer's apartment building 3 days later. He sat behind the wheel, questioning his own judgment. The board meeting had gone well. He'd arrived with minutes to spare, freshly showered and changed at his penthouse. No one had questioned where he'd been at dawn. No one would dare. But something about that morning, about the tiny apartment bursting with life, about Ethan's eager questions, about Jennifer's quiet dignity, had lingered with him, an echo he couldn't silence. He'd instructed HR to mark Jennifer's absence as approved leave. When his assistant had raised an eyebrow, he'd simply said, "Family emergency," and turned away. Now he was back. A manila folder of urgent documents on the passenger seat, his flimsy excuse for this visit. The documents weren't urgent. They weren't even relevant. They were just papers he'd grabbed from his desk, a prop in a performance he didn't fully understand. Blake finally exited the car, nodding to a neighbor who stared a bit too long at his vehicle. The lobby was empty, save for a broken vending machine and mailboxes with peeling name labels. He took the stairs again, the familiar tightness returning to his chest as he approached 4C. His knock was gentler this time. Jennifer opened the door, surprise washing over her features. She wore simple jeans and a faded blue sweater, a stark contrast to her cleaning uniform. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and there was a smudge of what looked like finger paint on her cheek. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cautious. "I didn't expect—" "Blake," he corrected her. "Please." "Blake," she repeated, the name sounding strange on her lips. "Is everything okay? Is this about my shift tonight? Because I've arranged for childcare and—" No, he assured her, suddenly feeling foolish. "I was in the neighborhood and realized I needed your signature on some documents, HR paperwork, for your approved leave." The lie was transparent, and they both knew it. Queens was not on the way to anywhere in Blake Sterling's life. Jennifer's eyes held a question, but she stepped aside. "Come in, it's art hour, so prepare yourself." The small living room had been transformed. Newspaper covered the floor, and Emma, a small girl with pigtails and her mother's smile, knelt in the center, applying paint to what appeared to be a papier-mâché volcano. Ethan sat at the table, tongue caught between his teeth in concentration, as he worked on a model rocket. "Mr. Sterling," Ethan exclaimed, jumping up. "Did you come to help with my science project?" "It's about propulsion." Blake found himself smiling. "Is that what you're building?" "Yeah. It's supposed to launch with baking soda and vinegar, but I think the proportions are wrong, because it just fizzes and doesn't go anywhere." Jennifer watched the exchange with guarded eyes. "Where's your folder of urgent documents?" she asked quietly. Blake patted his empty hands, realizing he'd left the prop in the car. "I just seem to have forgotten them." A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "That's not like you, Mr. Sterling. Everything I've read suggests you're quite meticulous." "Blake," he reminded her, "and perhaps you shouldn't believe everything you read." Noah made his presence known with a gurgle from a baby swing in the corner. Blake found himself drawn to the infant, who looked markedly better than during their first meeting. "His fever broke yesterday," Jennifer explained, following his gaze. "The pediatrician says it was just a virus." Blake nodded, feeling strangely relieved. "Good. That's the good." An awkward silence settled between them, filled only by Emma's humming and the scratch of Ethan's pencil as he returned to his calculations. "Would you like some coffee?" Jennifer finally offered. "It's nothing fancy, just Dino Blend. But it's hot." "That would be nice," Blake replied, though he typically only drank specialty roasted beans prepared by his personal chef. The kitchen was tiny, barely enough room for one person to navigate, let alone two. Blake stood in the doorway watching as Jennifer moved efficiently in the confined space, reaching for mugs, measuring grounds. "Why are you really here, Mr. Sterling?" she asked without turning around. The question deserved honesty, but Blake found he didn't have an answer he could articulate. How could he explain an impulse he didn't understand himself? "I wanted to see how Noah was feeling," he said finally. "It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. And you couldn't have called the night manager to ask." "I could have." Jennifer turned, coffee pot in hand, studying him with those perceptive eyes. "You run a multi-billion-dollar company. You don't make personal house calls to check on employees' sick children." "Perhaps I should," Blake said, surprising himself. "Perhaps there's value in knowing the people who keep your empire running." She poured the coffee into mismatched mugs, one advertising the Mets, another from Queen's College. "Cream or sugar?" "Black is fine," he said, accepting the Mets mug. The coffee was indeed nothing like his usual brew, stronger, less complex, but somehow satisfying in its straightforwardness. "Mr. Sterling." "Blake." "Blake," she conceded. "I appreciate your concern, but this is unusual, and I don't want my children getting the wrong idea. About," Jennifer lowered her voice, "Ethan has his questions about his father. Seeing you here again." "I understand," Blake said quickly. "I didn't mean to complicate things." From the living room, Ethan called out, "Mom, can Mr. Sterling stay for dinner? He can help me with the launch calculations." Jennifer looked at Blake apologetically. "You don't have to." "I'd like to," he heard himself say. "If that's all right." Something shifted in Jennifer's expression, a softening perhaps or simple resignation. "It's just spaghetti and meatballs." Sounds perfect. And somehow it was. Blake Sterling, who had dined at Michelin-starred restaurants around the world, found himself at a small table covered in a plastic tablecloth, twirling pasta with a family of virtual strangers. Emma insisted on saying grace, her small hand surprisingly warm in his. Ethan peppered him with questions about rockets and business, and whether he'd ever met any astronauts. He had at a charity gala, but he couldn't recall their names. Noah watched from his high chair, occasionally banging a plastic spoon with startling enthusiasm. It was chaotic, unpredictable, nothing like the carefully orchestrated meals of his regular life. And yet, as Jennifer passed him a plate of garlic bread with an apologetic smile, "It's from the freezer. Nothing special." Blake felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he hadn't even known was there. After dinner, he helped Ethan adjust his rocket design, explaining the principles of thrust and lift, while Jennifer bathed Emma and settled Noah for the night. When it was time to leave, he found himself reluctant to go. "Thank you," he said at the door, "for dinner. And for—" he gestured vaguely, unable to name what he was actually grateful for. Jennifer nodded. "You're welcome any time, Blake." She hesitated, then added, "But maybe call first, so I can at least pretend I need to sign some urgent documents." He laughed, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "I will." As Blake drove back to Manhattan, the glittering skyline rising before him like a familiar shore, he realized he was already planning his next visit. He would bring proper educational supplies for Ethan. The boy clearly had an aptitude for engineering. And perhaps a physics book. Not a textbook, something accessible but challenging. And Emma might enjoy professional art supplies, rather than the dollar store watercolors she'd been using. His phone rang. The car's Bluetooth system displaying Curtis Blackwell, CFO, on the dashboard screen. Blake hesitated, then declined the call. Whatever financial crisis Curtis was facing could wait until morning. For the first time in years, Blake Sterling had spent an evening not thinking about Sterling Enterprises, not strategizing about market shares or acquisition targets. Instead, he'd shown an 8-year-old how to calculate the optimal ratio of baking soda to vinegar for maximum propulsion. And somehow, that felt like an achievement worth more than his last successful merger. He didn't recognize it yet, but something fundamental had shifted in Blake Sterling's carefully constructed world, like the first tremors before a tectonic plate realigns. He was a man accustomed to moving pieces on a global chessboard, to calculating risk and return with precision. Yet here he was, driving back from Queens with spaghetti sauce on his custom-tailored shirt cuff, already planning his next visit to an apartment that somehow felt more alive than his sprawling penthouse ever had. What he didn't know, couldn't know, was that across town, Curtis Blackwell was sitting in his office, staring at the call declined notification on his phone, a frown deepening on his face. Curtis had been Blake's CFO for 8 years, and never, not once, had Blake Sterling declined his call. Something was off. Something had changed. And Curtis Blackwell didn't like change he couldn't control. Over the next few weeks, Blake's visits to apartment 4C became a regular occurrence. He no longer bothered with pretexts or excuses. He simply called ahead, as Jennifer had requested, and arrived bearing what he considered modest gifts: educational toys, books, occasionally takeout from restaurants that didn't normally deliver to Queens. The children had quickly accepted his presence in their lives. Emma had appointed him her official art critic, solemnly presenting her latest creations for his evaluation. Ethan had moved from rockets to robotics, devouring the books Blake brought him, and peppering him with increasingly complex questions. And Noah, tiny, demanding Noah, had developed a habit of falling asleep only when cradled in Blake's inexperienced but increasingly confident arms. It was a Thursday evening when Blake arrived to find Jennifer more distracted than usual. She welcomed him with a tired smile, but her eyes kept darting to a pile of papers on the counter, her fingers fidgeting with her phone. "Is everything okay?" he asked, handing her the bag of Thai food he'd brought. "Fine," she said too quickly. "The kids are excited to see you. Emma made you something at school." But as the children showed him their latest projects, Blake noticed Jennifer slip into the kitchen, pick up one of the papers, a medical bill, he glimpsed, and run her hand through her hair in a gesture he'd come to recognize as stress. Later, after the children were occupied with dinner, he found her staring at the bill again. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "if you need help—" "We're fine," she interrupted, quickly tucking the paper into a drawer. "It's just—" "Noah's tests were more expensive than I expected. Insurance covered most of it, but—" Blake reached for his wallet. "Let me—" "No." Her response was sharp, definitive. "I didn't tell you about this so you would pay it. I have the means," he said reasonably. "It would be nothing to me." "It's not nothing to me," Jennifer's eyes flashed. "I've been taking care of my family on my own for years. I don't need charity." "It's not charity. It's help. From my boss?" She shook her head. "That crosses a line." Blake wanted to argue that he was more than her boss now. He was, what exactly, a friend? A surrogate father figure to her children? He wasn't sure what role he was playing in this family's life, only that it had become increasingly important to him. "At least, let me look at the bill," he suggested. "My company has excellent lawyers. Maybe there's been a mistake with the insurance." Jennifer hesitated, then relented, retrieving the paper. Blake examined it, a series of charges for specialized pediatric tests, each with an exorbitant price tag. The insurance had indeed covered a significant portion, but the remaining balance was still substantial for someone on a cleaner's salary. "I'll make some calls," he promised. Jennifer looked like she wanted to object further, but Emma called from the living room demanding her attention. When Jennifer left to help her daughter, Blake quickly snapped a photo of the bill with his phone, noting the account number and provider details. The next morning, his assistant made a single call. By afternoon, the balance on Noah's medical bill had been mysteriously paid in full. Blake didn't mention it when he next visited the apartment, but several days later, when Jennifer answered the door, her expression was tight, controlled. "You paid Noah's medical bill," she said. It wasn't a question. Blake stepped inside, removing his coat. "The hospital made a billing error. I simply had it corrected. Don't lie to me." Jennifer's voice was quiet but firm. "They called to confirm the payment. They mentioned Sterling Enterprises specifically." Blake sighed. "I was trying to help." "We're not for sale, Blake." Her eyes met his, unwavering. "No one here is asking for your charity." "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's—" "What? What is it?" She gestured around the apartment. "What is all this? The visits, the gifts, the paid bills? What are you doing here?" The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't expected it, but because he didn't have an answer ready. What was he doing here in this small apartment in Queens, with this family that wasn't his? "I enjoy being here," he said finally, the simple truth of it surprising even him. "With you, with the children." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "You have a multi-billion-dollar company to run." "A life of your own." "Friends, family—" "I have a company," Blake corrected her. "The rest—" He trailed off, unwilling to admit how empty his personal life had become, how the pursuit of success had gradually hollowed out everything else. Jennifer studied him, her gaze penetrating. "The children are getting attached to you," she said carefully. "Especially Ethan." "I'm attached to them too," Blake admitted. "And when you get bored, when the novelty of playing house in Queens wears off." "What then?" The accusation stung, all the more because he couldn't entirely dismiss it. Wasn't that what his life had been? A series of intense interests that eventually gave way to the next challenge, the next acquisition, the next goal? "This is different," he insisted. "How?" He couldn't articulate it. How the chaos of her small apartment had become more real to him than the ordered luxury of his penthouse. How he found himself thinking about Ethan's science questions during board meetings. How he had started scheduling his workday around bath time for Noah. Instead of answering, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I wanted to ask if you and the children might like to visit my place in the Hamptons this weekend. It's on the beach. There's a pool, horses nearby. I thought the kids might enjoy it." Jennifer looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "Blake, just as friends," he added quickly. "There are 5 bedrooms. Plenty of space for everyone." She hesitated, clearly torn. "I can't keep accepting things from you. It's not a thing. It's an experience. For the children." At the mention of her children, Jennifer's resolve wavered. "They've never seen the ocean," she admitted. "Emma's been begging to ride a horse since she was 3. Blake felt a surge of triumph. "Then say yes." After a long moment, Jennifer nodded. "Just for the weekend, and we'll stay in separate rooms." "Of course. And no more paying bills behind my back." "Agreed." The weekend arrived with perfect early summer weather. Blake sent a car to pick up Jennifer and the children, meeting them at the sprawling beach house that had featured in Architectural Digest, but which he rarely visited. The property came alive with the children's excitement. Emma's squeals when she saw the pool, Ethan's wide-eyed exploration of every room, even Noah's babbling as he took in the new surroundings from his mother's arms. Blake had arranged everything: age-appropriate toys, swimming gear, even a local riding instructor to give Emma her first lesson on a gentle mare. He watched from the terrace as Jennifer helped her daughter feed the horse an apple, both of their faces alight with joy. "You really like my mom, don't you?" Ethan's voice startled him. Blake turned to find the boy watching him intently. Yes, your mother is a remarkable woman." Ethan nodded solemnly. "She works really hard. 3 jobs sometimes." "3?" Blake frowned. He'd known Jennifer had taken night classes, but he hadn't realized she was working multiple jobs. Cleaning at your building, weekend shifts at the diner, and sometimes she transcribes stuff online. Ethan looked out at his mother and sister. "That's why she's always tired. But she never complains." Blake felt something twist in his chest, admiration mixed with an unfamiliar sense of shame. He'd been impressed by Jennifer's resilience, without fully understanding what that resilience cost her. "Your mother deserves a break," he said quietly. Ethan looked up at him. "Are you going to be my dad now?" The question, so direct and hopeful, left Blake momentarily speechless. "Ethan, it's complicated. Your mother and I are friends. But you look at her the way Prince Charming looks at Cinderella in Emma's movies." Blake couldn't help but smile. "Do I?" "Yeah, like she's magic or something." Later that evening, after the children were asleep in their rooms, Blake found Jennifer on the beach. She stood at the water's edge, waves lapping at her bare feet, her face turned toward the moon. The sight of her, silhouetted against the silver-streaked ocean, created a strange ache in his chest. He approached quietly, not wanting to disturb her reverie. But she sensed his presence, turning with a smile that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "Thank you for today," she said. "Emma hasn't stopped talking about Buttercup the horse. I think we've created a monster." Blake laughed. "I'll arrange more lessons if she's interested." Jennifer turned back to the ocean. "It's beautiful here, peaceful." "It is." But Blake wasn't looking at the ocean. They stood in companionable silence, listening to the rhythm of the waves. When Jennifer shivered slightly in the night breeze, Blake instinctively moved closer, offering warmth. "Blake," she said, her voice barely audible above the surf. "What are we doing?" It was the same question she'd asked in her apartment. But now, with the vast ocean before them and the star-filled sky above, it carried a different weight, a different possibility. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I want to find out." Jennifer turned to face him, moonlight catching in her eyes. "I'm a single mother with 3 children and a mountain of student debt. You're a billionaire CEO. This isn't a Hallmark movie." "Maybe it should be," Blake said softly. For a moment, it seemed as if the space between them might close, as if the current that had been pulling them together since that first morning in her apartment might finally complete its circuit. But then from the house a cry pierced the night, Noah waking from his sleep. Jennifer stepped back, the moment broken. "Duty calls," she said with a small smile. As she turned to go, Blake caught her hand. Jennifer. She looked back, waiting. I'm glad you came this weekend. Her fingers squeezed his briefly before she pulled away. So am I. Blake remained on the beach long after she'd gone, watching the moonlight play across the water, feeling as though something profound had shifted in his life, as if the tide had turned, pulling him toward an unfamiliar shore. The summer storm hit New York without warning, a sudden deluge that turned streets into rivers and sent lightning arcing across the darkened sky. Blake had been in a shareholder meeting when the power went out, emergency generators immediately illuminating the boardroom, with an eerie glow as Curtis Blackwell smoothly continued his presentation on quarterly projections. But Blake's thoughts weren't on profit margins or market expansion. They were on apartment 4C in Queens, where the aging electrical system had been problematic even on good days. He discreetly slipped out of the meeting, ignored his assistant's protests, and headed for his car. The drive to Queens was treacherous, windshield wipers working overtime against the torrential rain. Twice he had to detour around flooded intersections. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Curtis, no doubt, questioning his abrupt departure. Blake ignored it. By the time he reached Jennifer's building, the storm had knocked out power to much of the neighborhood. The stairwell was dark, illuminated only by the flashlight on his phone and the occasional flash of lightning through grimy windows. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his Italian leather shoes squelching on the wet concrete. When he reached 4C, he could hear Emma's frightened cries from within. He knocked, harder than he intended in his urgency. The door opened to reveal Jennifer, holding a battery-powered lantern that cast her face in dramatic shadows. Behind her, Emma clutched a stuffed unicorn, tears streaking her cheeks. "Blake!" Jennifer's surprise was evident even in the dim light. "What are you doing here?" "The storm," he said, as if that explained everything. "I was worried about the power." "About you, Mr. Blake," Emma cried, running to him and wrapping her arms around his legs, her earlier fear apparently forgotten. "The lights went boom and now the monsters can get in." Blake lifted the little girl instinctively. "Well, that's why I'm here. I'm excellent at monster patrol." Jennifer's eyes softened as she watched them. "You drove all the way here in this storm to check on us?" "Of course," Blake said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if billionaire CEOs routinely abandoned board meetings to check on cleaning staff during thunderstorms. She stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was transformed by the storm and the power outage, shadows dancing on the walls as Jennifer placed candles and battery lanterns strategically around the room. Ethan sat at the table, a flashlight propped up to illuminate the book he was reading. Noah, miraculously, was asleep in his portable crib, undisturbed by the chaos of the elements outside. "I was just about to make shadow puppets for Emma," Jennifer explained, setting her lantern on the coffee table. "To distract her from the storm." "I know shadow puppets," Blake said, surprising himself. A forgotten memory surfaced. His mother on a long-ago night during another power outage, creating rabbits and birds with her graceful hands against the wall of their modest apartment before success and wealth and her eventual departure from his life. He set Emma down and positioned his hands between the lantern and the wall. "Watch," he instructed, manipulating his fingers to create the silhouette of a rabbit. Emma's delight was immediate, her earlier fears forgotten as she clapped her hands. "Do another one," she demanded. For the next hour, the storm raged outside while inside apartment 4C, time seemed to stand still. Blake created an entire shadow menagerie for Emma. Ethan joined them, showing off the shadow dinosaur he'd perfected. Jennifer made hot chocolate on the gas stove, the sweet aroma filling the candlelit apartment. When Emma finally tired of the shadow show and Ethan returned to his book, Blake found himself sitting beside Jennifer on the worn sofa, their faces illuminated only by candlelight. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replied simply. Jennifer studied him in the flickering light. "You're not what I expected, Blake Sterling." "What did you expect?" She smiled. "The man from those magazine articles, ruthless, calculating. The shark of Silicon Alley, I think Fortune called you." Blake winced. "That particular nickname was my PR team's idea. Apparently, predatory marine life inspires investor confidence. And is he real?" "The shark?" Blake considered the question. He was. Maybe he still is in the boardroom. But lately, he hesitated. Lately, I've been questioning some of my priorities. Because of us? Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible above the rain. Because of you, Blake admitted. All of you. A flash of lightning illuminated her face, revealing an expression so complex, so vulnerable, that Blake felt something shift within him, a tectonic movement of emotion he'd long kept buried. I should check on Noah, Jennifer said suddenly, rising from the sofa. Blake watched her go, aware that a moment had passed between them, a moment of truth that neither was quite ready to fully acknowledge. The storm continued through the night, the power remaining stubbornly out. Emma eventually fell asleep on a makeshift pallet of blankets on the living room floor, insisting that Blake continue his monster patrol nearby. Ethan dozed off on the sofa, his book still clutched in his hands. Blake found Jennifer in the kitchen, staring out the window at the rain-lashed night, another cup of hot chocolate cradled in her hands. You should get some sleep, he suggested. She turned to him with a tired smile. So should you. Don't you have an empire to run in the morning? The empire can wait. Jennifer shook her head slightly. This isn't your world. Blake, queens during a blackout, instant hot chocolate, children sleeping on the floor. Maybe it should be, he said quietly. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if seeing something new. You can't mean that. Why not? Because, Jennifer gestured vaguely, because you're Blake Sterling. You have a penthouse and private jets and board meetings. You don't belong here. I haven't felt like I belonged anywhere in a very long time, Blake admitted, until I started coming here. The confession hung between them, raw and honest in the candlelight. Jennifer set down her mug, her hands trembling slightly. Blake, she began, but whatever she meant to say was lost, as Noah's cry pierced the night. Blake followed her to the portable crib where the baby was fussing, his tiny face scrunched in discomfort. Jennifer lifted him, murmuring soothing words, but Noah continued to cry. He's still warm, she said, touching his forehead. The pediatrician said the fever might come back. Do you have medicine? Blake asked, instantly concerned. Jennifer nodded toward the bathroom. Children's Tylenol in the medicine cabinet. But it's dark in there. I'll get it, Blake offered, navigating carefully through the shadowy apartment. He found the medicine by the light of his phone, returning to find Jennifer rocking Noah gently. Together they administered the Tylenol, their hands brushing in the darkness as they tended to the feverish infant. He likes you, Jennifer observed, as Noah's cries subsided, his tiny hand clutching Blake's finger. The feeling is mutual, Blake replied softly. They stayed like that, the three of them, until Noah drifted back to sleep. The intimacy of the moment, this shared care for a vulnerable life, affected Blake profoundly. In his world of acquisitions and assets, of competitive strategy and market dominance, there was nothing comparable to this simple, elemental connection. When Noah was settled, Jennifer looked up at Blake, her face close to his in the dim light. Stay, she whispered. It's still pouring and it's late. You can take the sofa. Blake nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Hours later, with the storm still raging outside, Blake lay awake on the too small sofa, listening to the sounds of the sleeping family around him. Emma's soft snores, Ethan's occasional murmur, the creaking of the old building as it weathered the storm. He had meetings in the morning, calls to return, decisions to make that would affect thousands of employees and millions in capital. Yet here, in this moment, those responsibilities seemed distant, almost abstract. His phone vibrated again, another call from Curtis. With a decisive gesture, Blake turned it off completely. Whatever crisis Curtis was facing at Sterling Enterprises would have to wait until morning. He closed his eyes, allowing himself to imagine just for a moment what it would be like if this were his life, not just an occasional visit, but every day. Waking up to Emma's chatter and Ethan's questions, helping with homework and bedtime stories, building a life with Jennifer, watching her pursue her dreams, supporting her journey. The thought should have terrified him. Blake Sterling, who valued control and independence above all else. Instead, it filled him with a strange peace, a sense of rightness he hadn't experienced in years. Outside, the storm began to subside, the rhythm of the rain gentling against the windows. Blake drifted towards sleep, his last conscious thought a realization that shook him to his core. He was falling in love. Not just with Jennifer, but with all of them. With this family, with the life they represented. With a future so different from the one he had planned, yet suddenly so much more appealing. What he didn't know, as sleep finally claimed him, was that across the city, in the Sterling Enterprises tower, Curtis Blackwell was reviewing security footage that showed Blake leaving the shareholder meeting. The timestamp matched exactly with the beginning of the storm, and Blake's abrupt departure had not gone unnoticed by the board members. Curtis reached for his phone, pulling up a contact he hadn't used in years. His text was brief. "I need information on a Jennifer Mills in Queens, priority." As the storm passed over New York, moving east toward the Atlantic, the currents of multiple lives were shifting, drawing together and pulling apart in patterns none of them could yet discern. Like the lightning that had illuminated the city skyline, revelations were coming. Brief, brilliant flashes that would expose truths long hidden in darkness. Blake stared at the signature on the report. Jennifer Mills Winters, a detail he'd somehow missed on her employee file. He sat alone in his office, the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, but his attention was fixed on the document before him. The drawing that had sparked his curiosity had been innocuous enough, a crayon masterpiece by Emma that Jennifer had proudly displayed on her refrigerator. But the childish scrawl at the bottom, Emma Mills Winters, had caught Blake's eye. The hyphenated surname had triggered a vague recognition, prompting him to dig through company archives when he returned to his office. Now he had his answer, and it left him feeling strangely hollow. Jennifer hadn't always been a cleaner at Sterling Enterprises. 6 years ago, she had worked in the financial analysis department, a promising junior analyst with a degree in business economics. Her personnel file included glowing performance reviews, commendations for innovative thinking, even a personal note from the department head marking her as executive track material. And then, during the Walker Tech acquisition, her position had been eliminated, part of a larger restructuring that Blake himself had authorized, a consolidation of departments, a streamlining of operations. 56 positions terminated, including Jennifer Mills Winters, financial analyst. 3 years later, she had reappeared in the company database, not as an analyst, but as part of the overnight cleaning staff. No one had made the connection. No one had noticed that the woman vacuuming executive offices at midnight had once been on a path to occupy one of them. Blake rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a migraine. Had Jennifer known who he was from the beginning? Had she recognized him that first morning when he appeared at her door? Was that why she had kept that framed article? Not as inspiration, but as a reminder of the man who had unwittingly altered the course of her life. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Curtis Blackwell stood in the doorway, his usual immaculate appearance somewhat diminished by the dark circles under his eyes. "You wanted to see me?" Curtis asked, his voice carefully neutral. Blake gestured to the chair across from his desk. "You've been investigating Jennifer Mills." It wasn't a question. Blake's private security team had discovered Curtis's inquiries, reporting them as a potential security breach. Curtis didn't bother to deny it. "I've been concerned about your involvement with this woman. It's affecting your focus, Blake. The board is starting to notice." "My focus is fine," Blake replied coldly. "Is it? You left a shareholder meeting during a crucial vote. You've rescheduled 3 major investor calls. And Thompson says you've barely looked at the Meridian acquisition proposal." Blake leaned back in his chair, studying his CFO, his friend, or so he'd thought. "And this justified investigating a member of our staff?" "I was protecting the company," Curtis insisted. "And you? Do you even know who she is?" "I know exactly who she is," Blake said, tapping the personnel file. "The question is, why didn't you tell me she used to work here?" "As an analyst?" Curtis's surprise seemed genuine. "What?" "I didn't—" He leaned forward, examining the file. "Mills Winters," he murmured. "The Walker Tech restructuring." "Yeah. Blake, there were dozens of positions eliminated. I couldn't have known." "That's not the point," Blake interrupted. "The point is that you've been having her investigated." "Going behind my back, why?" Curtis hesitated, then sighed. "Because I'm worried about you." "About what this distraction might mean for Sterling Enterprises?" "Distraction," Blake repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "Is that what you call it?" when I finally develop an interest in something beyond quarterly reports. When that interest involves a former employee with 3 children who happens to clean your office. Yes, I call that a distraction, at best. Curtis leaned forward. Blake, you need to think about how this looks. How it looks? Blake felt his temper rising. To whom exactly? To the board. To the market. To the public if this gets out. Curtis spread his hands. You're Blake Sterling. Your personal life has always been above reproach, discreet, appropriate. Empty, Blake corrected him. Sterile, lonely. Curtis shook his head. This isn't like you. Maybe it should be. Blake stood, walking to the window. The city sprawled before him. His city, in many ways, shaped by his company's innovations, his investments, his vision. And yet, in recent weeks, it had begun to feel like an elaborate stage set. Impressive, but ultimately hollow compared to the cramped, chaotic warmth of apartment 4C. I've made some calls, Curtis said carefully. Her ex-husband's mother, Eleanor Winters, she's concerned about the children, particularly given Jennifer's financial situation. Blake turned sharply. You contacted her former mother-in-law. I was being thorough. You were overstepping. Blake's voice was dangerously quiet. My personal life is not company business, Curtis. It is when it affects the company, Curtis countered. Eleanor Winters is well connected. She's been trying to get custody of those children for years, apparently. She believes they deserve a more stable environment. The implication was clear, and it sent a chill through Blake. Stay away from Jennifer and her family, he warned. That's not a request. Curtis stood, straightening his tie. I understand you're invested in this situation, but I have a duty to protect Sterling Enterprises, even from its founder if necessary. The threat hung in the air between them, subtle but unmistakable. Blake had always appreciated Curtis's ruthless efficiency, his willingness to make difficult decisions. It was what made him an excellent CFO. But now, that same quality felt like a blade pointed at something precious and vulnerable. That will be all. Curtis, Blake said, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Curtis paused at the door. For what it's worth, I hope I'm wrong about her. After Curtis left, Blake remained at the window, watching darkness fall over the city. His phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer. Kids asking when you're coming over. Noah has something to show you. The simple text brought a smile to his face, easing some of the tension Curtis had left in his wake. He typed a quick reply. On my way, traffic. He gathered his coat, instructing his assistant to cancel his remaining appointments. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Blake's thoughts returned to the personnel file. Jennifer had lost her promising career during his company's restructuring. She had been forced to take a cleaning job at the very place that had once recognized her potential. And yet, in all their conversations, she had never mentioned it, never thrown it in his face, never used it as leverage. The realization only deepened his admiration for her, but it also raised uncomfortable questions. Did she resent him? Had her welcoming him into her home, into her children's lives, been some elaborate form of revenge? The thought seemed unworthy of her, yet Blake couldn't entirely dismiss it. As his car navigated through evening traffic toward Queens, Blake's phone rang. The screen displayed Eleanor Winters, a name he recognized from Curtis's report, but had never seen on his caller ID before. He answered cautiously. Mr. Sterling, a cultured female voice greeted him. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Mrs. Winters, Blake acknowledged. How did you get this number? Oh, your Mr. Blackwell was quite helpful, she replied smoothly. He seemed to think we might have mutual interests regarding my grandchildren. Blake's grip tightened on the phone. I doubt that very much. Don't be so sure, Eleanor Winters continued, unperturbed. I understand you've become quite involved with my former daughter-in-law and her children. My grandchildren. Your point being, my point, Mr. Sterling, is that those children deserve stability. A proper home, advantages that Jennifer simply cannot provide, despite her best efforts, of course. They have a proper home, Blake countered, and a mother who loves them. Love doesn't pay for college, Mr. Sterling, or braces, or the specialized care that little Noah will need for his condition. Blake frowned. Noah's condition? Oh, Eleanor's voice dripped with false concern. She hasn't told you. How interesting. Blake remained silent, unwilling to give her the satisfaction of asking for details. "My grandson has been diagnosed with a rare form of epilepsy," Eleanor continued after a moment. "It's manageable with proper care, but that care is expensive, specialized, beyond what a cleaning lady can provide." The revelation hit Blake hard. Jennifer hadn't mentioned any diagnosis, had only referred to Noah's fevers, his fussiness as normal baby issues. Why had she kept this from him? "I've been trying to help those children for years," Eleanor went on, "since my son's unfortunate departure. But Jennifer is stubborn, proud to a fault. She refuses my assistance, insists on struggling alone." "Perhaps she has her reasons," Blake suggested, thinking of Jennifer's reaction to his paying Noah's medical bill. "Oh, I'm sure she does," Eleanor agreed. "But the fact remains. Those children need more than she can give them. And now, with your involvement stirring up media interest—" "Media interest?" Blake's voice sharpened. "Haven't you seen? Page 6 ran a little item this morning. Nothing explicit, just hints about a tech billionaire seen repeatedly visiting a humble Queen's apartment. No names yet, but it's only a matter of time." Blake swore under his breath. This was Curtis's doing. It had to be. A warning shot, designed to push Blake away from Jennifer before the situation became a public relations issue. "What do you want, Mrs. Winters?" he asked directly. "The same thing you should want," she replied. "What's best for those children? And you believe that's removing them from their mother?" "I believe it's providing them with stability, opportunity, and proper care. Something I'm prepared to do, with or without your assistance." The threat was clear. "Stay away from Jennifer and her children," Blake said, echoing his earlier warning to Curtis. "My dear Mr. Sterling," Eleanor's voice cooled, "those are my grandchildren. I have rights, and I have lawyers who are very good at establishing those rights." The call ended, leaving Blake seething with anger and worry. By the time he reached Jennifer's apartment building, he had fielded 3 calls from his PR team about the page 6 item and a text from his lawyer, warning about potential personal entanglements with staff. His world was closing in, the carefully separated spheres of his existence colliding in ways he hadn't anticipated. And at the center of the collision was apartment 4C, the place that had somehow become more real to him than the penthouse where he slept, or the corner office where he worked. Blake took the stairs slowly, his earlier eagerness tempered by Eleanor's revelations and Curtis's machinations. When Jennifer opened the door, her smile of welcome faded as she read his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. Noah was on a playmat, kicking excitedly when he saw Blake. Ethan and Emma were at the table, homework spread before them. The familiar scene, one that had come to represent comfort and authenticity to Blake, now seemed fragile, threatened. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About Noah's diagnosis, about your previous position at Sterling Enterprises, and about Eleanor Winters." Jennifer's face paled. "How did you—" "No," Blake finished for her. "That's what we need to discuss." The children were finally asleep. Emma had insisted on 2 bedtime stories. Ethan had questions about black holes that couldn't wait until morning. And Noah had fussed until Blake had rocked him to sleep, a ritual that had become surprisingly natural over the past weeks. Now Blake and Jennifer sat at opposite ends of her small kitchen table, mugs of tea cooling between them. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken truths. "Why didn't you tell me?" Blake finally asked. "About your position at Sterling Enterprises. About being laid off during the Walker Tech acquisition." Jennifer's fingers traced the rim of her mug. "Would it have mattered? That first morning when you came here to fire me?" "Yes," Blake said immediately, then hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe not then, but later when we started, whatever this is. You could have told me." "And said what?" "By the way, Blake, you're the reason I went from promising analyst to cleaning lady." Jennifer shook her head. "What good would that have done? It would have been honest." "It would have been manipulative," she countered. "Using our history to make you feel guilty, to create an obligation." Blake leaned forward. "Is that what you think this is? Me fulfilling some sort of obligation?" "Isn't it?" Jennifer met his gaze directly. The billionaire CEO swooping in to rescue the struggling single mother and her children. "It's a classic redemption narrative, Blake. The accusation stung, all the more because Blake couldn't entirely dismiss it. Had that been part of his initial attraction to this family? Some subconscious desire to atone for past corporate decisions that had human consequences he'd never bothered to consider? "That's not fair," he said finally. "Whatever brought me here that first day, that's not why I kept coming back." Jennifer's expression softened slightly. "Then why did you?" "Because..." Blake struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand himself. "Because when I'm here with you and the children, the world makes sense in a way it never has before. Because Ethan's questions make me think about more than quarterly projections. Because Emma's art makes me see beauty I've been missing. Because when Noah falls asleep in my arms, I feel like I'm doing something that actually matters." The raw honesty of his response hung in the air between them. Jennifer's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "And you," Blake continued, his voice lower, "you challenge me. You don't care about my net worth or my company's stock price. You call me on my bullshit. You make me want to be worthy of this, of all of you." Jennifer blinked rapidly. "Blake, no, let me finish." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I don't know what this is between us. I don't know where it's going. But I do know it's not about obligation or guilt or some midlife crisis. It's about the fact that I'm happier in this apartment than I've been anywhere else in years." A tear slipped down Jennifer's cheek. "And Noah's condition, Eleanor told you." Blake nodded. "Why keep that from me?" "Because it's not your burden to bear," Jennifer said simply. "Noah has benign Rolandic epilepsy. It's relatively mild, controllable with medication. He'll likely outgrow it by adolescence. But the monitoring, the specialists, the medications, they're expensive. And I didn't want you thinking that I could help." Blake finished for her. "That you should help," Jennifer corrected. "This isn't your responsibility, Blake. My children, their health, their future, that's on me, not you." Blake squeezed her hand. "What if I want it to be on me, too?" The question hung between them, a possibility neither had dared articulate until now. Jennifer withdrew her hand gently. "Blake, your CFO has been investigating me. Your ex-mother-in-law is threatening to take my children. There's gossip in page 6. Your entire world is pushing back against whatever this is. Maybe that's a sign." "A sign of what?" "Trace might tell me that this doesn't work. That we're from different worlds. That some gaps can't be bridged, no matter how much we might want them to be." Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Are you ending this?" "I'm being realistic," Jennifer said quietly. "I've worked too hard to build a stable life for my children, to watch it all collapse because of tabloid gossip or custody battles. They've been through enough." "I can help with that," Blake insisted. "My lawyers, my resources." "That's exactly what I don't want." Jennifer's voice rose slightly. Then she glanced toward the children's room and continued more quietly. "I don't want to be someone you need to fix or save, Blake. I don't want my children to be your pet project. Is that what you think this is?" "I think," Jennifer said carefully, "that you're a good man with good intentions. But you're used to solving problems with money and power. And it can't be solved that way." Blake stood, frustration driving him to pace the small kitchen. "So what then? I just walk away? Pretend the last few months never happened? Go back to being the shark of Silicon Alley? Maybe that would be best for everyone." The words hit Blake like a physical blow. "You don't mean that." Jennifer looked away. "Eleanor called me too. She has photographs of you coming here. She's prepared to use them in a custody hearing, to argue that I'm pursuing a relationship with you for financial gain, that it shows poor judgment on my part." "That's absurd." "Is it?" Jennifer's eyes met his. "What would you think looking from the outside? Single mother of 3, struggling financially, suddenly in a relationship with a billionaire whose company she happens to clean." Blake ran a hand through his hair. "I'll talk to Eleanor. Make her understand." "She doesn't want to understand, Blake. She wants her grandchildren. She always has." Jennifer's voice broke slightly. "After James left, she blamed me. Said I wasn't good enough for her son, that I'd trapped him with a pregnancy. When he was gone, she tried to prove I was an unfit mother." Blake knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. "Listen to me. Eleanor Winters is not going to take your children. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that." "Watch me," Blake said, with the same determination that had built his company from nothing. The next morning, Blake arrived at Sterling Enterprises earlier than usual. He'd spent a restless night in his penthouse, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. When Curtis Blackwell arrived at 7:30, Blake was waiting in his office. "We need to talk," Blake said without preamble. Curtis set down his briefcase, his expression wary. "About your conversation with Eleanor Winters. About the page 6 item that mysteriously appeared after you started investigating Jennifer." "Blake?" "No," Blake cut him off. "You listen. For 20 years I've trusted you, valued your counsel, considered you a friend. And this is how you repay that trust? By going behind my back? By threatening a woman and her children?" Curtis straightened. "I wasn't threatening anyone. I was protecting this company." "Your company? From what exactly? From me finding happiness outside these walls?" "From scandal," Curtis replied firmly. "From the board questioning your judgment. From the market responding to rumors about your personal life affecting your business decisions." Blake laughed humorlessly. "My personal life has never affected my business decisions. If anything, it's been the opposite problem. Until now," Curtis pointed out. "Done until Jennifer Mills Winters." The use of her full name, a deliberate reminder of her connection to the company, only hardened Blake's resolve. "I've made a decision," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Effective immediately, Jennifer Mills will be rehired by Sterling Enterprises. Not as cleaning staff, but as special executive assistant to the CEO with a salary commensurate with her qualifications and experience." Curtis stared at him. "You can't be serious. A private office, full benefits, flexible hours to accommodate her children's needs." Blake continued as if Curtis hadn't spoken. "Her employment contract will be backdated to account for the years she lost after the Walker Tech restructuring, with compensation adjusted accordingly. The board will never approve this." "The board doesn't need to approve my choice of personal staff," Blake countered. "And if they question it, I'll remind them who holds controlling interest in this company." Curtis shook his head slowly. "This is a mistake, Blake, a massive public mistake." "No," Blake said with certainty. "The mistake was forgetting that companies are made of people, not just profit margins. The mistake was letting you convince me that success only looks one way." He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "The paperwork for Jennifer's new position will be on your desk within the hour. I expect it processed by end of day. And if I refuse?" Blake's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you can tender your resignation along with your refusal." The ultimatum hung in the air. Between them, 2 decades of partnership and friendship balanced against Blake's newfound determination. "Don't do this," Curtis said quietly. "Not for her." "I'm not doing it for her," Blake replied. "I'm doing it for me, for the man I want to be, rather than the man you think I should remain." After Curtis left, Blake called his lawyer, instructing him to contact Eleanor Winters with a clear message. Any attempt to pursue custody of Jennifer's children would be met with the full force of Blake's legal team and resources. By afternoon, Jennifer's employment paperwork was processed. Blake personally prepared a welcome package, contract, company ID, benefits information, and drove to Queens, anticipation building with each mile. He imagined her reaction, surprise, joy, perhaps even tears, as she realized her career path was being restored, her financial worries alleviated. He imagined Ethan's excitement about his mother's new position, Emma's pride, the stability this would provide for Noah's medical care. He imagined the 4 of them celebrating tonight, perhaps planning a future that now seemed possible in ways it hadn't before. But when Jennifer opened her apartment door, her expression wasn't what he'd expected. She accepted the envelope he offered, opened it, and scanned its contents in silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were not filled with gratitude or joy, but with a profound disappointment that stopped Blake cold. "What is this?" she asked, her voice unnaturally calm. "Your new position," Blake explained, his earlier enthusiasm faltering. "Executive assistant to the CEO. The salary is substantial. Full benefits, flexible hours for the children. It's everything you deserve, Jennifer. Everything that was taken from you 6 years ago." Jennifer closed the folder deliberately. "And did it occur to you to discuss this with me first?" "I wanted it to be a surprise." "A surprise," she repeated flatly. "Like the paid medical bill? Like the information you gathered about my past at your company? Like the threats to Eleanor? Blake stiffened. She told you about that? Archie, she called this morning. Quite upset. Jennifer shook her head slowly. This is exactly what I was talking about last night, Blake. You don't solve problems by discussing them or working through them together. You throw money and power at them until they disappear. I was trying to help, Blake insisted, to fix what my company broke. I don't need fixing, Jennifer said quietly. And I don't need a job that everyone at Sterling Enterprises will know I got because I'm sleeping with the boss. The crude phrasing shocked Blake. That's not what it is. Of course it is. Jennifer handed the envelope back to him. This isn't a solution, Blake. It's a band-aid. It's you trying to make me fit into your world instead of figuring out if our worlds can coexist at all. Blake felt the ground shifting beneath him. The certainty. He'd felt that morning crumbling in the face of her rejection. I thought you'd be happy. That's the problem, Jennifer said softly. You didn't ask what would make me happy. You decided for me. Just like you decided to eliminate my position 6 years ago without considering the person behind the spreadsheet entry. The parallel struck Blake with painful clarity. In both instances, he had made decisions that profoundly affected Jennifer's life without consulting her. First, as an impersonal corporate strategy, now as a misguided attempt at help. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate. I should have asked. Yes, Jennifer agreed. You should have. She stepped back from the door. I think you should go now, Blake. I need some time to think about what's best for me, for my children. Jennifer, please, goodbye, Blake. The door closed gently but firmly between them. Blake stood in the hallway, the rejected envelope in his hands, feeling as though something precious and irreplaceable had just slipped through his fingers. When he returned to his car, there was a text waiting from Curtis. Employment paperwork processed as requested. Board chairman requesting urgent meeting tomorrow morning recent decisions. Blake didn't respond. Instead, he sat in his car outside Jennifer's building until darkness fell, hoping she might call, might text, might open her door again. But the evening passed in silence, the windows of apartment 4C remaining dark and distant. Finally, as midnight approached, Blake drove back to Manhattan, the glittering skyline offering none of its usual comfort. The empire he had built, the power he wielded so effortlessly in boardrooms and business deals, had proven useless in the one arena that had suddenly come to matter most. In trying to help Jennifer, he had only succeeded in pushing her away. In attempting to secure her future, he had jeopardized his place in it. The irony was bitter. Blake Sterling, master strategist in business, had catastrophically miscalculated in matters of the heart. 3 days passed without word from Jennifer. Blake had sent texts, first apologetic, then concerned, finally just a simple "I miss you all," but received no response. He'd driven by the apartment once, noted the lights on, but couldn't bring himself to intrude again. The board meeting Curtis had warned about had been predictably contentious. Questions about Blake's judgment, about the propriety of offering a substantial position to a current member of the cleaning staff, about the potential for negative press. Blake had weathered it all with an uncharacteristic silence, neither defending his decision nor rescinding it. The position remains open, he had told them finally. Whether Ms. Mills accepts it or not is her decision, not this board's. Now alone in his penthouse on a Saturday morning, Blake felt the walls closing in. The minimalist design that had once seemed elegant now felt sterile. The panoramic views that had represented achievement now seemed like a glass barrier separating him from the real world below. His phone rang, Ethan's name appearing on the screen. Blake answered immediately. "Mr. Blake." The boy's voice was small, uncertain. "Ethan." Blake felt a surge of emotion at hearing the child's voice. "How are you, buddy?" "Mom doesn't know I'm calling," Ethan admitted in a rush. "I took her phone while she was giving Noah his medicine. But I needed to ask you something." Blake sat down, giving the boy his full attention. "What is it? Do you not love us anymore?" The direct question, delivered in Ethan's innocent voice, pierced Blake like a physical pain. "Ethan, of course I do," he said immediately. "Why would you think that?" "Because you stopped coming over." Blake could hear the confusion in the boy's voice. "And Mom's been crying at night when she thinks we're asleep. And Emma keeps asking when you're coming back. And I don't know what to tell her." Blake closed his eyes. the child's words painting a vivid picture of the pain his well-intentioned but misguided actions had caused. "I made a mistake," Blake said simply, choosing honesty over platitudes. "I tried to help your mom in a way that wasn't what she wanted. And sometimes, Ethan, adults need time to figure things out, even adults who care about each other very much. But you're coming back, right?" The hope in Ethan's voice was unbearable. Before Blake could answer, he heard Jennifer's voice in the background. "Ethan? Who are you talking to? Is that my phone?" There was a scuffle, muffled voices. Then Jennifer was on the line. "Blake," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm sorry. Ethan shouldn't have called you." "It's okay," Blake said, quickly. "I'm glad he did. Jennifer, please, can we talk?" "Really talk?" A pause. "This isn't a good time." "Then when?" "Name the time, the place, anywhere." Another longer pause. Then reluctantly, "The custody hearing is Monday. Family court downtown, 9 o'clock. Blake felt his stomach drop. "Custody hearing? Eleanor went through with it?" "Apparently your threats only strengthened her resolve," Jennifer said, a bitter edge to her voice. "She's claiming I'm using my relationship with you to advance my career, that it shows unstable judgment, that the children would be better off with her." "I'll be there," Blake promised immediately. "My lawyers?" "No lawyers," Jennifer cut him off. "No grand gestures. No fixing this with money or power. If you want to help, just be there, as yourself, not as Blake Sterling, CEO. The line went dead before Blake could respond. Monday morning found Blake sitting in the back row of a crowded family court. He wore a simple suit, not his usual bespoke Italian, but something more subdued. Jennifer sat at the front with her attorney, a young woman whose off-the-rack suit suggested pro bono work rather than high-priced representation. Across the aisle, Eleanor Winters projected regal disdain, her silver hair perfectly styled, her designer outfit proclaiming success and stability. Her legal team, 3 attorneys with leather portfolios and matching stern expressions, projected confidence. The proceedings began with Eleanor's lead attorney presenting their case. Jennifer Mills Winters was an unfit mother. Her financial instability, her multiple jobs, her inconsistent schedule, all painted as evidence of an environment unsuitable for children. And now, most damningly, her relationship with her employer, presented with just enough innuendo to suggest impropriety without stating it outright. Blake watched Jennifer's shoulders tense with each accusation, saw her hands clench into fists as her parenting was systematically dissected and found wanting. The injustice of it burned in his throat. When Eleanor took the stand, she played the role of concerned grandmother perfectly, voice trembling with just the right amount of emotion as she described her desperate worry for her grandchildren, particularly Noah with his medical needs. "I can provide the stability these children deserve," Eleanor testified. "The schools, the healthcare, the opportunities that Jennifer simply cannot afford." Jennifer's attorney did her best on cross-examination, but Eleanor was well prepared, deflecting questions about her previous attempts to gain custody, about her strained relationship with her former daughter-in-law. Then it was Jennifer's turn. She took the stand with quiet dignity, answering questions about her employment, her childcare arrangements, her plans for the children's future. Her voice only wavered once, when describing Noah's diagnosis and her efforts to provide for his care. "Ms. Mills Winters," Eleanor's attorney began during cross-examination, "please tell the court about your relationship with Blake Sterling." Jennifer hesitated. "Mr. Sterling is a friend. A friend who happens to be your employer?" The attorney's skepticism was evident. "Yes." "And isn't it true that Mr. Sterling recently offered you a position as his personal assistant, with a salary increase of over 400%? Jennifer's eyes flickered to Blake briefly. "He offered me a position, yes? Based on what qualifications exactly?" Before Jennifer could answer, Blake stood. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" The judge, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, peered at him over her glasses. "And you are?" "Blake Sterling, Your Honor." A murmur ran through the courtroom as recognition dawned. "Mr. Sterling, this is a closed family court proceeding. Are you a relative of either party?" "No, Your Honor, but I believe I can provide context relevant to these proceedings." The judge considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Approach." Blake walked to the front of the courtroom, feeling Eleanor Winter's glare and Jennifer's apprehension as he passed. He was sworn in and took the stand, looking directly at the judge rather than at either woman. Your Honor, my name has been introduced into these proceedings in a way that I believe unfairly prejudices the court against Jennifer Mills Winters. I'd like to clarify several points. Proceed, the judge instructed. Blake took a deep breath. First, Jennifer Mills Winters was previously employed by my company as a financial analyst. 6 years ago, during a corporate restructuring that I authorized, her position was eliminated, along with 55 others. This decision, made purely for business reasons without consideration of individual circumstances, forced her to abandon her career path and eventually take a position on our cleaning staff to support her family. He glanced at Jennifer, whose surprise was evident. He had never acknowledged his role in her career derailment so publicly before. Second, Blake continued, when I recently discovered this history, I attempted to make amends by offering her a position that would restore her professional trajectory. This offer was not based on any personal relationship, but on her qualifications and experience, which were exceptional according to her personnel records. Blake shifted in his seat, addressing the elephant in the room. As for my presence in Jennifer's home and in her children's lives, that began when I discovered that she had missed a work shift because she was caring for her sick infant. Instead of firing her as I had initially intended, I found myself drawn to the extraordinary environment she has created for her children, despite limited resources. He looked directly at Eleanor now. In Ethan, Emma, and Noah, I have observed well-adjusted, curious, and loving children. They are thriving, not despite Jennifer's circumstances, but because of her unwavering dedication to their welfare. Eleanor's attorney stood. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling's personal opinions about Ms. Mills Winters' parenting are hardly relevant to these proceedings. On the contrary, the judge replied, Mr. Sterling appears to have spent considerable time in this household. His observations are potentially valuable. She nodded for Blake to continue. Your Honor, I am not here as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. I'm here as someone who has witnessed firsthand Jennifer's extraordinary capacity as a mother, who has seen her help Ethan with fractions at midnight after working a full shift, who has watched her create art projects with Emma using materials she scavenged because she couldn't afford store-bought supplies, who has seen her monitor Noah's medication with meticulous care while simultaneously preparing meals and checking homework. Blake leaned forward. The suggestion that these children would be better served in any other environment is, frankly, absurd. What Jennifer Mills Winters has created in that small apartment in Queens is something no amount of money or privilege could replicate. A home built on unconditional love, respect, and resilience. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Blake could feel Jennifer's gaze on him but didn't dare look at her yet. Finally, Your Honor, I would like to address the insinuation that Jennifer has pursued a relationship with me for financial gain. Blake's voice hardened. Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, she recently rejected a position at my company precisely because she feared it would create exactly this kind of misperception. She has consistently refused financial assistance, declined gifts that she deemed excessive, and maintained her independence despite my repeated offers of help. He finally turned to look at Jennifer, no longer caring who witnessed his expression. If anything, I have been the beneficiary of our acquaintance. Jennifer and her children have reminded me of what matters beyond balance sheets and board meetings. They have shown me what family truly means, and for that I am profoundly grateful. The judge studied Blake thoughtfully. Mr. Sterling, are you in a romantic relationship with Ms. Mills Winters? Blake hesitated, then answered honestly. I care deeply for Jennifer and her children, Your Honor. The exact nature of our relationship is still evolving. I see, the judge made a note. And if the court were to maintain custody with Ms. Mills Winters, what would be your continued involvement with this family? Blake hadn't expected this question, but found the answer came easily. Whatever Jennifer wishes it to be, Your Honor, but I hope to remain a part of their lives for as long as they'll have me. Even if that meant adjustments to your professional obligations. Blake didn't hesitate. I submitted my resignation as CEO of Sterling Enterprises this morning, Your Honor, effective immediately. A collective gasp ran through the courtroom. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth. Even Eleanor Winters looked shocked. "That's a significant decision, Mr. Sterling," the judge observed. "May I ask why?" "Because some things are more important than running a company," Blake said simply. "I'll remain on the board, but the day-to-day operations will be handled by others. I've realized recently that success can be measured in many ways, and that I've been using the wrong metrics for most of my life." The judge nodded, dismissing him from the stand. As Blake returned to his seat, he caught Jennifer's eye. The mix of emotions in her gaze, surprise, confusion, and something that might have been hope, gave him courage. After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. Custody would remain with Jennifer, with Eleanor granted regular visitation rights. The judge made a point of addressing Eleanor directly. "Mrs. Winters, your concern for your grandchildren is commendable, but attempting to separate them from a mother who has clearly devoted herself to their welfare is not in their best interest. I encourage you to find ways to support this family rather than divide it." Outside the courtroom, Blake waited as Jennifer spoke quietly with her attorney. Eleanor Winters approached him, her perfect composure slightly frayed at the edges. That was quite a performance. "Mr. Sterling," she said coolly. "It wasn't a performance," Blake replied. Eleanor studied him. "You really resigned as CEO?" "I did. For her. For them," Eleanor gestured toward Jennifer. "For all of us," Blake corrected, "including myself." Something shifted in Eleanor's expression, a grudging reassessment. James never would have done that. Not for Jennifer. Not for anyone. "Then James was a fool," Blake said quietly. Eleanor's lips tightened, but before she could respond, Jennifer approached, the children trailing behind her. Ethan's face lit up when he saw Blake. "Mr. Blake." "You came." He launched himself forward, wrapping his arms around Blake's waist. "I promised I would," Blake replied, returning the hug. Emma tugged at his jacket. "Are you coming home with us now? Mommy's been sad without you." Jennifer blushed. "Emma, that's enough." Eleanor watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. After a moment, she knelt to eye level with Ethan and Emma. "I thought perhaps," she said, her voice softer than Blake had yet heard it, "you might all come to my house for lunch. I have a garden, and I believe there are some toys that belong to your father that you might like to see." The peace offering hung in the air. Jennifer hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice. Thank you, Eleanor." As the children chatted excitedly about visiting their grandmother's house, Jennifer drew Blake aside. "Did you really resign?" she asked, her voice low. "Yes." "Because of us?" "Because of me," Blake clarified. "Because I finally realized what I want my life to be about. Who I want in it." Jennifer studied him. "And the special assistant position?" "The offer stands, but it's entirely your decision. No pressure, no expectations." Blake took her hand cautiously. "I meant what I said in there, Jennifer. I want to be part of your lives, all of you, in whatever way you'll have me." Jennifer's eyes searched his. "It won't be easy. Our worlds are still very different." "Then we'll build a new one," Blake said simply. "Together." A small smile curved Jennifer's lips. "That sounds possible. That's all I'm asking for, possibility." 6 months later, a moving van pulled up to a brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It wasn't Manhattan and it wasn't Queens, but somewhere in between, a middle ground that represented the new life Blake and Jennifer were building together. The house had a small backyard where Emma could play, separate bedrooms for each child, and an office where Jennifer was completing her MBA, courtesy of a scholarship program she had helped establish at her new position heading Sterling Enterprises, Foundation for Educational Equity. Blake carried boxes from the van, directing movers with Noah's crib and Ethan's beloved telescope. He had found his place as a strategic advisor to several startups, working hours that allowed him to be home for dinner and bedtime stories. The reduced income was more than compensated by the richness of his daily life. Eleanor arrived with lunch for everyone. Her initial hostility transformed into something approaching affection, especially for Noah, whom she doted on shamelessly. Her relationship with Jennifer remained complicated, but was steadily improving, built on their shared love for the children. As the family gathered around the dining table in their new home, Eleanor passing sandwiches, Ethan explaining the solar system to anyone who would listen, Emma showing off her latest art project, Noah babbling happily in his high chair. Blake caught Jennifer's eye across the happy chaos. "Worth it?" she asked quietly. Blake looked around at the family that had found him when he wasn't looking, at the life that had emerged from a morning when he'd set out to fire a cleaner and instead found his heart. "Every moment," he replied.